Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Eric Severinghouse, and I am the co founder and co CEO. Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining. My name is Eric Severinghouse, and I'm the co founder and co CEO of Bloomfilter. We are very excited, or I'm very excited. I'm going to have a special guest here joining very soon from Solonis. Very excited to talk to you about how to train and govern enterprise agents, and in fact, even make them self optimizing using process context and process intelligence. So, Bloomfilter is a proud partner company of Solonis. Together, we recently announced Solonis for Agent Miner at Celosphere, which is Solonis's largest user conference. And we've got some actually special new announcements that we're making today around not only how we can govern and observe the agents, but also how we can even use the process data and process context to make the agent smarter automatically. Now, at a high level, if you really think about the sort of broader macro environment that we all live in, at the end of the day, every business, large or small, no matter where it's located, no matter what it's doing, every business and every boardroom right now is grappling with the idea that we are at an epochal shift in terms of the era of how business processes get executed. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that this is akin to the Industrial Revolution in terms of changing the way that work gets done across society. And when you really think about this at the broadest and most structural level, every company in the world is trying to figure out the answer to the same questions. How do we ultimately differentiate our organization as we transition and transform into the era of AI? And this is a really hard thing to do because when we think about artificial intelligence and we think about agents, one of the biggest challenges here is the commoditization and the similarities around it. Fundamentally, every company, large and small, is mostly running the same LLMs, the same frontier models that were running on the same hyperscalers, being powered by the same GPUs. There's tremendous commoditization across the stack. And so when you think about if you're the CEO of a large company and you're trying to figure out how do I differentiate myself from my peers when fundamentally I'm running on the same resources as they are. Now, at the end of the day, we're strong believers that there's really one vector for differentiation as the world transitions to the agentic era, and that's data and process context. Pretty much all LLMs have been trained on the same roughly 1 petabyte of common crawl internet data. So everything that I've typed into Reddit and like opinions that I have on the world, these things have all made their way into the LLMs and into the collective brain. But when you think about any large company, there's typically multiple petabytes of information contained behind the firewall. And that information is highly relevant to that organization. It's all of the process information around how business processes get executed within any particular company. And so if you think about that data is the key way to differentiate your execution from your peers, what it really means is that we're all basically running the same AI arms race, and we effectively have two dimensions for differentiation. The first is how do we use the proprietary process intelligence of our organization, the data that exists behind the firewall, to make our agents smarter than our competitors? And the second is how do we execute better at the agentic transformation? And that really gets into how do we leverage process governance to make sure that we execute better in this increasingly hybrid environment where pretty much every business process is being executed by a combination of carbon and silicon neural nets, humans and agents. Now, the really cool thing about being a partner company of Celonis in this world is that Celonis, as well as Bloomfilter, have been figuring out this problem for years. In fact, for more than a dozen years, we've been figuring out how do we leverage process intelligence to understand what's happening within an organization. And so the Celonis platform across many different dimensions connects people to processes, teams together, and now in the new world, humans to agents as we figure out collectively how to execute in the agentic era. And in fact, I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that Celonis is the world's largest source of process context for AI. If you're following any of the online debates, you've probably seen a lot of the sort of world out there right now talking about how the process context graph is potentially a $1 trillion opportunity around how to train and govern AI. And that's really the fundamental execution opportunity that exists as we think about the opportunity for process intelligence to inform agentic intelligence. All right, so that's really interesting as a why, right? Like the broad strokes, big pervasive problem, everybody's trying to deal with it, fantastic. So how do we actually make this work? How do we actually unlock the value of that process intelligence and that process context in order to make the agents more efficient? And so this is where we've recently announced the Agent Miner, Celonis Agent Miner powered by Bloomfilter. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to process mine what agents are doing and to overlay that agentic behavior on the same process graph that we have the human behavior. So, for the first time in history, we've got observability around what humans are doing and what agents are doing in the same systems. This allows us to get a whole new level of visibility into how agents are actually working, how is work being passed off, where are there inefficiencies, and where might there be rework in this process. And then once we've got these data elements overlaid on one another, we can do things like answer the real costs that boards are asking around AI. So when we want to understand, what are we spending all that money and tokens on? And are we actually getting process performance improvements from that investment? Once we have all of this overlaid together, we can actually answer those questions. Just to validate a little bit deeper, and what I'm showing you here is some screenshots of the Celonis Agent Miner platform. But just to validate this a little bit deeper, what we ultimately are able to do is we're able to show things like, how does the cycle time of a process change when we have agents involved? And what you're seeing here, for instance, is with one customer where we see the median throughput when agents are involved going from 8 days to 1 day. We can understand, what is the cycle time change when we have humans in the loop versus humans not in the loop? And what's the success rate of autonomous execution with the agents versus how often do they need to go call out humans for help? We can also look at what percentage of the cases that we're executing have agents informing the actions. So this allows us to get board level metrics and strategic metrics around how our organization is adopting AI and how effective that investment is in ultimately bringing business value to the organization. But it doesn't stop there, because we know that it's great to be able to see the surface level measures around ROI, but then we're always going to want to go deeper. So we're going to want to understand the why and the how and the what in terms of how our agents and humans are interacting. By having these behaviors on a unified process intelligence graph, we can see the events, we can see the interactions, we can see the processes, we can see where things are going well, and we can see where there might be challenges. And we can actually drill all the way down to the individual cases and the individual interactions. So we can understand things like, what's the sentiment? How are the agents and humans talking to each other, and how well are they collaborating? We can understand where there might be rework loops, or where might the agents be running into challenges and needing to call out for help. And ultimately, when we pull all of this together, it makes AI not just a fun, shiny toy that does some whiz bang things, but it actually helps us integrate what's happening with those agents into where work gets done within the business process. But it's not enough to just be able to show, here's where we have challenges. What we also want to be able to do is we want to be able to take that process context, and we want to be able to use that to make our agents smarter. So let's say that we identify consistently that there's a rework loop at some particular stage of the process, and we see that we have suboptimal measures around that particular part of the process. But whenever we hit that rework loop, there's certain activities that might need to happen, maybe a documentation package or a testing package or some sort of validation or things like that. By using the process context and the process intelligence, we can identify that. We can see that it's happening through observing the process. And then we can use a protocol called MCP to actually make the agent smarter. So we can change the instructions that we send to the agent in order to optimize the chances that that agent is going to be able to process the work straight through without needing help. And this almost magical sort of completing of the loop allows us to leverage the process intelligence, not just to govern the agents, but to actually improve their performance. Just to kind of zoom out here for a second, to kind of show you the architecture chart. This is where we basically pulling the information in from multiple different systems of record. We're creating a digital twin of the process. We're applying business context to that digital twin and the process data. And ultimately, this process intelligence graph that has the objects and the events and the relationships all modeled out. And then we're using AI native protocols like LLM fine tuning, MCP, RAG, et cetera, to ultimately train and govern the agents so that we can observe them and we can make them smarter. Just to zoom in for one quick second, the example that I gave you before, what you can see here is just a quick step through where we identify that there's a rework loop that's creating challenges. That rework loop is increasing cycle time and it's reducing the efficiency of the process. We then pass the instructions to the agent in order to make that agent smarter. And then we monitor the agentic execution. And in this case, we see that that rework loop has gone away because we've now improved the instructions and we've allowed the agent to execute better within our particular business process. Ultimately, what this is doing at a deeper level, and I'm going to make a quick call out because in about a month, we're going to be going deeper into the technical puts and takes of this solution. But what you can think about this doing is transforming the raw business context and knowledge that's contained in all of the event logs from your systems of record into context and process intelligence to make the agent smarter as it's executing. So what we're really doing is transforming those event logs into agent instruction files in a way that we can then prove makes the agent more intelligent. So quick next steps at the end of this year, we're going to show you a QR code, which is going to allow you to get more information, to download a white paper and an ebook around the magic and the sort of technical elements of how we ultimately end up making this happen. But we collaborate here very closely with our friends at Celonis to identify processes for agentic enablement, frame the value and understand the ROI, and then ultimately improve the execution of those agents using process intelligence. So with that, I am going to bring my friend Jacob Netzel into the conversation because this becomes a lot more interesting when it's dialogue and not just monologue. Jacob, would you mind introducing yourself to the audience and maybe just telling them a little bit more about your role at Celonis?
Yeah, hey Eric. Always great talking to you, first of all, and thanks for having me on here. Great presentation so far, and very, very stoked to get into conversation with you. Yeah, I'm Jacob. I'm the domain lead for information technology in Celonis product management. So that means, in essence, that my team is building and enabling standardized and packaged solutions on top of the Celonis platform in IT relevant process areas. So we cover some of our areas ourselves, like system transformation, IT service management, and so on and so forth, right? But we also want to scale in other core areas with selected strategic partners like yourselves, Bloomfilter, who are really playing an integral role in our customer success here. So that's why I'm on here. I'm very stoked to talk to you.
Well, we certainly do appreciate it. And Jacob, Celonis has been a thought leader before this idea of process context became sexy in the world of AI. You know, Celonis has been figuring this out for a long, long time. You guys have a long and storied history, and I think it's very clear that Celonis is the world leader around process intelligence and process context. Celonis loves to say that there is no AI without PI. And I'd love if you could maybe expand a little bit around how Celonis thinks about that. And in particular, a couple of concrete customer examples for how Celonis leverages process intelligence in order to make AI work in enterprise use cases.
Yes, definitely. I mean, you've already mentioned it, right? We're the world's, let's say, have the world's largest repository of process context, right? Data models, business rules, KPIs, and so on across thousands and thousands of deployments, right? You bring basically the deep expertise in agentic process mining, right, and the specialized monitoring layer on top, right? And I think here really this comes together very well, right? So process intelligence without agentic observability is kind of like very blind to the new workforce, right? And then also on the other side, agent observability without process context is oftentimes just noise, right? And together we can basically close this loop, right? And how we are actually doing this or concretely doing this with our customers in process intelligence and their AI journey. I mean, you've already mentioned like these three integration patterns, right? One is basically MCP, right? So we're injecting real-time process context into basically agent prompts, right? So kind of like going into the direction of, okay, this vendor has like 3 open disputes and so on, please handle this with care, right? So this is really basically telling the clerk basically what to be careful of with a given anomaly, for example, right? Another example is then, for example, RAG, right? So retrieval augmented generation. So we are grounding the agent decisions into our actual process data, right? Which is a very, very unique differentiator. So we don't just tell them what should happen, but we actually can tell them what happens. You know, and then the third point that you've also mentioned it, right? LLM kind of like fine tuning. You know, so we're using kind of like the process success and failure patterns and so on, right? And we feed this back into our models in order to improve performance of domain specific tasks, right? One example here is, for example, a customer in handling invoices, right? So an agent handling invoice approvals. They can now kind of like understand of saying like, okay, this invoice is from a strategic supplier with like a 99 plus percent of on-time delivery, right? So here we basically can include reasoning and basically treat not all invoices identically, but basically differentiated. Another example for my domain, kind of in IT service management, is a customer who's using a request management agent, right? That is basically leveraging Celonis to turn kind of like free text requests and so on, free request queries into the right catalog items, enriching them basically with process intelligence to boost quality, cut non-catalog items, and also ultimately reduce delays in this like very productivity heavy process like ITSM.
And I'm curious then, Jacob, there's a lot of activity. There's a lot of, dare I say, noise in the space of AI. There's a lot of vendors all kind of trying to sort themselves out in this highly dynamic operating environment. What's the Celonis strategy? Like, is Celonis focused on creating net new LLMs, or like where do you think of Celonis playing in the stack around how you ultimately make customers successful?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's a pretty clear answer to this, I would say. So really acting as an infrastructure and enablement layer rather than basically as a building platform, right? So we are very, very, let's say, model agnostic. We can work with any kind of like models and tool integrations like OpenAI, Anthropic, and so on. Any frontier models that are emerging and so on and so forth, right? The second one is, I've already mentioned it, kind of like we not a builder platform, but we are builder agent. We are an agent platform agnostic player. So we integrate with players like UiPath. We are partnering up with Microsoft and so on and so forth, right? With AWS Bedrock and stuff like that, right? So it's very, very easy for us to together with Bloomfilter to be basically this middle layer of all these different players, right, and bring them together and make sense of everything of this chaos, right? We will talk about governance probably as well and so on, right? So this is really one of the unique differentiators as well, that we can bring all of these platforms together and build one that is basically source of truth, right? And then
Yeah,
again,
I know we
also,
all both work with a number of systems integrators and leading SIs in the world to help create packaged value for customers as they kind of try and figure out this world.
yeah, for sure, right? And speed is of the essence as well, right? I mean, everybody is building agents now. Within the company, the departments are very disconnected. They use like different platforms for different use cases and so on and so forth, right? So they're all like going into different directions, right? And the investments get like sprinkled all over. And they don't really have a place to, let's say, to govern, to monitor, to optimize, and to visualize what is actually happening. And I think this is a great solution to this problem, you know. And the third part here is really kind of like this enablement layer to say, okay, we bring this process context through our, let's say, our APIs and so on, that really basically makes these agents smarter. And you can kind of like make the analogy of a car and so on, right? So we're not building like tires, we're not building the cars itself and so on, but it's more like we're building the GPS and the road infrastructure, right, in order to make everybody navigate better, right, and come to their let's say goal or destination a little bit better.
And Jacob, you mentioned speed and time being of the essence. I think we all feel that as the world continues to move faster and faster. Can you give examples or heuristics around time to value and like Like if you think about going into an enterprise that's doing an agentic deployment, and they say, all right, I can see how process context could be valuable as I'm trying to ultimately drive improvement in the process. Like, is that a multi-year journey? Is it a multi-month journey? Is it a multi-week journey? Like what does that typically look like as you work with customers?
Mm. Yeah, for sure. That's also a great question. I mean, you've mentioned it already. Speed is of the essence, right? We're moving so fast, and that's why the time of our customers is very valuable, and they don't have so much time to, let's say, waste around. So that's why we try to speed up the process as much as possible, right? So with our process intelligence graph, we already give a very accelerated start to customers selecting any kind of target process, right? So we have all like a unified data model that can provide objects and events for any given process in a matter of days or even hours, right? Depending on the, let's say, customization degree of the customer setup. And then we're really fast in like maybe in a week to 3-4 weeks, depending on how customized it is, right? To really set this baseline current state, right? And then it's from there we basically frame. Right, we add basically the agents to the mix, to the process and so on. We connect the agent logs, right? And there we can basically already give an answer to, okay, this is how my process works. And a couple of weeks later, this is how my agent works, right? And then we start validating the ROI, right? Because we can put both one and one together, or two and two together, if you will. And this is basically where we go into the realization phase, right? And this can happen like end to end from like 2 to like 6 weeks or something like this, right? In the realization phase, that's the beautiful thing about it, is ongoing, right? Because you have, like you said before, Bloom filter agent miner is feeding back, is fine tuning the models and so on, is optimizing the agents as we go. So the realization will not cut off at a given point. But you've basically envisioned a solution together with us where we have a continuously optimization loop, right, which is running, and that is really great.
Yeah,
So
and
maybe shooting a question back to you, right, as well. So for the agent miner, you have specific from your domain, right, in software development and so on. You have specific, let's say, a specific process in mind and so on. But how do you plan, for example, also to kind of like democratize the agent miner and bring it to any kind of, like, say, process?
yeah. So I love it. Put me on the spot. Thanks. So when we think about the sort of fundamental primitives around agent miner, what it ultimately comes down to is the math around being able to observe what the agent's doing,
Yeah.
breaking open the black box of the agentic behavior, inferring why it's ultimately making certain decisions, structuring that and creating a data ontology, because at the end of the day this stuff still all comes back to metadata management and like understanding the ontology of what's happening, so that we can do this in a way that ultimately the optimization algorithms can understand, and then being able to feed that back. And the cool thing about this is, while domain expertise and knowledge is always helpful, at the most fundamental layer, those sorts of things are process agnostic. And so we can fundamentally then roll this out across different processes. We began with the process of software development lifecycle, which is sort of like where Bloomfilter began as a company. But we very quickly had large customers say, can we do this in accounts payable? Can we do this in customer success? And the answer to our delight was yes, absolutely. And we're in the process of rolling that out. So that's been very exciting. It sort of brings full circle, Jacob, where you were saying like, hey, we get this stuff stood up and going in a couple weeks, not a couple months. And I oftentimes have customers where their eyes kind of get wide open, and they say, why is it you're able to move so fast? And the answer is, well, we have spent years figuring out the hard, messy problems around quantifying and understanding process flow and process telemetry. And
Yeah.
those are really hard, challenging problems that you can't fix. You can't solve those problems in weeks. Those problems take years. But we built an intellectual property model. I oftentimes marvel at the foresight that Salonis had around introducing object-centered process mining, because that process model, I'm guessing when you guys invented it, you weren't inventing it as a way to almost create like the perfect nomenclature to train AI and to understand the AI component of a process. but it
Yeah.
really laid the foundation in a way that then allows us to move very quickly together. And it's something that we feel very fortunate to be part of the Solonis ecosystem.
Yeah, and I want to double down on this. You said something very important, right? When customers get like the shiny eyes and saying like, hey, how can we apply this to different processes? How can we add and not more agents to it and so on and so forth, right? This is creating a multitude of objects, of event logs and so on, and that all have to work together, right? And with the traditional let's say process mining, which is very case centric and so on, this becomes a big problem, right? And brings, let's say, a lot of players to their knees already. And that's why I think there's a huge differentiator. You've mentioned it, object-centric process mining, right? Bringing this world together, basically having the ability to add an arbitrary number of business objects and agent objects together in order to really paint this overall an end-to-end picture, right? Because you can not only, you're not isolated in your singular process and so on. Agents are already becoming, let's say, cross-process, cross-system, and so on and so forth, right? So there's a big need to bring all of this together. And I think, like you said, the foundation here is really what sets us apart here as well. So I really love that you touched upon that one as well.
Yeah, well, Jacob, I know we could go on forever, and I'm excited to continue this conversation. I know this is not going to be the last time you and I are going to be chatting about this stuff on
For
various
sure.
different stages. I want to thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And for everybody who joined, thank you so much for listening in. If you have questions or want to learn more, we've written an ebook on this topic around process intelligence for AI agents. And we've got a QR code at the end of this, which will allow you to download that ebook. We're also happy, along with Solonis, to help educate or help you guys understand the technology capabilities of the platform around how we can ultimately bring that process intelligence and that process context to agents. We're going to be doing a deeper technical walkthrough of this in about a month's time, where we're going to be going even deeper into kind of the speeds and feeds and puts and takes around how we make this magic happen. And ultimately, this is going to be the first in a pretty consistent series of conversations that we're going to be having around leveraging process context and process intelligence in the AI era. So once again, thanks to everybody for joining. Jacob, thank you so much for being a part of this. And we're looking forward to
Thank you,
continuing the
Eric.
conversation with everybody.
Yeah, I'm stoked. Looking forward to what's to come.